with the little girl watering the plants. That's why I think I've gotten all my plant watering obsession. So I come from a childhood where there was lots of reading, obviously. Lots of reading. Although we came from a parochial school in Dotole, that was my school. My mother was my teacher from the nursery. She was chief cook and bottom washer, as we used to call her, because she used to look after the kids in the school. The school nursery section was started because my mom agreed to be the teacher there, and she had 4 children and they were all in the school, and so there was a lot of reading in the evening, a lot of sitting around tuitions in which we wrote on these little slates with pencils, you know, the slate, the little pencils which broke all the time, and you had to spit on your finger. It was always spit and polish. You didn't have those erasers, so it was a fun time. Very organic time. So our reading, and my dad being a great reader, he was really prolific. He used to bring these books, and the next day he said, "Have you finished reading the book?" So we had to finish reading those books, and we stocked them. We just loved to keep them. We didn't share them a lot. I don't see. Maybe it was a certain middle class thing that certain middle class children read these, whereas the poorer children did not. Maybe they were expensive books. My dad was a politician. The type who made no money. This was in the 60s. But he invested in books. He really read very, very, very widely, very eclectically. And so I think that's where I got my desire for reading and teaching literature. So teaching these, when I was told I was going to teach folk tales, I was excited. But I had no idea how to actually present it to kids who are not readers. Much as everyone might want to imagine that children are still reading and they're avid readers, no. I would say in my class of 70, I would get 3 students. You work out the maths. 3 students who would read their texts even. They're all Googling, ChatGPTing. Very convenient, that ChatGPT fellow. Whenever you need him, he's always there. So there's not much reading. So how do I teach kids this? I ended up reading them in class. And as Sharmila said, the folk culture, the folk genre is really an oral culture. It comes from listening to stories. Reading cuts the fun out of it. We like people telling us stories. The fun is in telling you the story. In those gasps or in between, in those silences in between, of what happened when that fellow was found on the coconut tree. Did he have his kashti on? Would have been a question I would have asked. If he had his kashti on, that means he was a toddy tapper who probably was sleepwalking, and he decided to, tap some toddy in the middle of the night, and he went up there and he was found. Or on All Souls Day. Bizarre things used to happen during our childhoods on All Souls Day. People's bones were taken out and, sent home. As I said, now you have them at home, keep them at home, he's yours. Really scary things used to happen. All kinds of ornaments were hung from trees and stuff. Very exciting times when we were kids. Nobody wrote about these things. So I think putting it down in a book is will leave behind a legacy for those who will never have this conversation at tea time over biscuits. I don't think kids are sitting with their grandparents and listening to these stories. Their parents are already past that generation. My mom still reads all our books, and she's aghast when she reads about all kinds of things in text today, but the devil and the deep sea, oh my God, there's so much. You're teaching this to the kids. We said, yeah, it all came from your generation. It's just printed now, and we are reading it, and the kids are okay with it. So my mother's generation is still into this. They're still reading. She still gets fun at sitting at table and talking about our ancestors and the stories. I could tell you so many stories that are completely homemade stories. About the funny funeral at our house. My grandmother's funeral was the funniest funeral I ever went to. Because 2 old ladies fell in a grave next to me at my grandmother's funeral. And I was pulling them out, and the other one was going in the other side, and I was trying to pull in. Everyone saying, our voice, and my grandmother trying to keep a straight face. It's such a solemn moment. So when I tell students that, they wonder, okay, so maybe folk tales are like this. Yet the folk tales that I had to teach, there was one story that, I think it was the first story. It was about the pomegranate queen. And what's the pomegranate queen? How does it start? You have these visions of a beautiful garden and pomegranates and stuff. No, it's about a man who wanted to marry his daughter. He had a couple of daughters. He found husbands for the other girls. They were quite happy to marry the men that the father had suggested. And then he finds this one daughter who refuses to marry. So what does he do? Take a wild guess. What would a father do if she doesn't marry the man he brings to her? Take a guess.
Marries her to the pomegranate.
No. In this story, he chops her up and buries her in the garden. Talk about composting. What a horrible shock I got when I first read it. And I thought, how do I read this to the kids? What would be their response? So, there were some kids who just passed it off. Okay, he killed her. Very naughty girl she was, didn't marry. So he killed her and he married her. So then he buried her in the garden. Didn't tell the mother. There's another twist to that story, that the mother was away when this happens. And he buries her. But of course the happy ending is that a pomegranate tree grows where she is buried. Some of the science students in my class should have asked me, did she swallow a pomegranate? Did the seeds, the seeds grow from there? How wonderful, the scientific fact. I had science students, I was teaching the science students this paper. So the science students, I was trying to connect, literature and science and showing them how folk culture has come into science, how science teachers can use folk culture to teach scientific facts and some PowerPoints and things that I had made. So this would have been a question from the science students, but no, they didn't ask me any of these questions. They were completely uninterested. In the question paper, I had to say to them, in one of the question papers, which is now the new academic policy, the new national education policy, has reduced some of these papers to mere guesswork. But one of the questions I asked was, would you give this story, what is not appropriate in this story perhaps for a child, if you were reading this to a child, that the father chops his daughter up and buries her? I mean, it's the cause of revolutions nowadays, that girls are treated so badly and that this parental control over who she should marry and stuff. So, there was no argument at all in the students' minds. Okay, so this was one of the stories. The other one was, of course, also taken from mythology, from the Ramayana or the Mahabharata, I think from the Ramayana perhaps. I'm not too familiar, but there's the daughter of Indra involved in it. Yeah. So there's a character who goes off and he's been told by someone, he's banished by his father. Again, lots of banishments happening, lots of kings banishing the princes for not being, it's called the disobedient prince. That's one of the titles. So he goes off and there's a lot of these folk elements in it, which is interesting in a couple of stories where there are these multiple elements that you mentioned. The mythologies, the folk elements, the animal elements coming in, the kind of motifs that you see in all stories across the world, globally. Because I also showed the students some Russian stories without telling them it was Russian. I turned off the script and things so that they didn't know it was Russian. But you could tell the music in the background. If you have a video, they're now filmed. These folk tales are put on screen and they're really beautiful. The trouble they take to actually bring in the cultural elements into stories today to make them more palatable for youngsters, so that there is the song, there's music, there's the color of their art. For instance, the way animation is done, folk tales are animated beautifully, as you can see in the text over here. Pictures make a big difference. In the old days, there was no element of picture. You had to just imagine things because you were narrated the story by your grandmother, and so it was all about punctuation and expression, and those elements were important. Maybe music, putting them to music. And song, singing out narratives, folk stories in the past. So today, of course, it's the different genre. These folk tales have been taken and they have been now converted into films and into little animated films, and with all the elements of it. So at the end of the day, I'm just my experience of teaching the back paper, teaching folk tales at the undergraduate level, has not been very exciting, because I found that students now, somehow they're not into that. They are a TikTok generation, a lot of them. They like things in small nuggets. They have no patience with that long story, the one, the disobedient prince, because it's a framed story. It has multiple plots in it, multiple things happening with the same kind of motifs. The prince, then he meets another, then he meets multiple heavenly wives that he has eventually, and he brings them down, and there's another bad king who wants to usurp those wives from him. So all the various values of, what we would say the values that we are trying to maybe propagate in colleges and in schools, basic values that you don't you grab something that doesn't belong to you, or you don't use any kind of guile to get things done. So all these, you can have that kind of conversation when you teach folk tales. But I think folk tales are much better narrated when you sit at a table in the evening, when your grandmother can tell you about these things, when your mother can tell you about these things, and you as a mother or a grandmother can share them with your younger kids. With due respect to those who print books out and who print folk tales into books, because you also have to do that to keep them for posterity in a library like this. You have to keep them. I feel maybe this should inspire us to just start telling people stories, because every family has these crazy people in them, and crazy people who generate crazy things that happen in their lives. My father was a great storyteller also. One day he was on a ferry passing from Agasai going across to Tanjung. In those days, there was no bridge there. The Vasco Bridge was not there. And my dad had a very sharp tongue. You can see where I get that from. So he got into an argument with a priest. There was a priest in his cassock and everything on the ferry. And people love to, as the ferry comes to dock, they love to move to the front. And usually the man who's handling the traffic there will say, move back. You know what happens when the ferry comes to dock? It gives you one little push. So you're not supposed to be right at the edge of it. So my dad tapped the priest and said in Portuguese. So he thought, well, brother in crime, let me just tell him, Father, don't go too close to the edge. This priest turned around and told him to mind his own business. So my dad said, okay. My dad moved back and the priest moved forward. And as the ferry came to land, the rest is history. The ferry gave one jhatka, as they call it, and he fell in. And my father raised his hands and said, as a priest would, Ita misa est. Go, the mass is over. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. I'm sure our friends and colleagues here have enjoyed your narration here. Very, very interesting. It's homemade. Actually, it's very indigenous. Thank you so much. Before we ask our contributors to share their experiences, I have here our colleagues, our team members. This is Nandini Cardozo, who I met during my journey of this compilation. And Megan D'Souza, I'm proud to say that she was actually both are alumni of St. Xavier's College. Nandini, but I don't really recall, because she had taken a subject which was very different to mine, and maybe I didn't have the occasion to interact with you. Megan D'Souza was a student of an alumni of St. Xavier's College, and she's a student as well. She is currently pursuing Masters in Konkani Literature, so she helped to translate Konkani stories into English. I ask Nandini to share her insights into this journey.
Good evening, everyone present today. This book, as Sharmila said, is also dear to my heart. Not because I assisted Sharmila, Megan and Frederick, but because today this book fulfills a gap that exists in Goan folklore. Stories are a great way to connect with each other. We learn about different people, we learn about different things from stories. As Alice ma'am, you have rightly pointed out, it's a great way to connect with the past, with the future, weaving its narrative through the present. And it's only when we tell our stories that we can connect to one another. Our stories become alive for each one of us. So how I got involved in this journey is my love for folk tales has always been there, and during the pandemic I started collecting books on folk stories from all over India, different books from different sellers, from different sources. And as my collection grew, I realized there was one thing missing: stories from Goa. Where were those stories? There was nothing. there was maximum one book that I remember seeing, Konkani Folktales by Professor Olivin Gomes. That was one. Then I heard about a story that was there, Folktales of Goa by Merwin. And I also heard about Professor Lucio Rodriguez's books, which were on the songs and soil. And there were folktales there, but I really didn't know whether it was something that was that we could relate to in the present times. So when in school, I remember reading so much about, these, in Konkani, our Konkani reader had, like for example, there was, I still remember, the Kodno Kuskut, the story, and that was something our teacher just read it to us, and that story is still alive for me. So now when I read it in the book, I know that it is alive for all of us present over here. And I'm glad that through this anthology, many of us can actually read the stories that have been passed down from generations, and we can just connect with what really makes us truly go on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nandini. And yes, I fully agree with you that stories are best narrated in the indigenous language, Konkani and Marathi, or whichever language of the land that is. Who can tell us better about how to read in a mnemonic style? A mnemonic style is a style that you try to enact stories which are, and make the audience feel the pulse of the story. It's called as a mnemonic style in folk literature. And who can tell us better to appreciate this mnemonic style is Megan D'Souza.
Hello everyone. It feels great to be a part of this. How I got connected to stories in the first place, folk stories. Mazadada, Tingaballa, he is getting emotional looking at me talk here. So, तो म्हाका ल्हानपणाचेर स्टोरीज सांगतालो. रातचे न्हिदूंक पयलीं आमकां तो स्टोरी सांगतालो आनी आपलीच घडोवन कितें तरी सांगतालो. मामी सांगताली आनी मामी आनी दाडा कडल्यान तो फोक स्टोरींचो जो लोक काणयांचो जो आमचो एक स्वाद आहा तो म्हाजे कडेन पावलो. आनी मॅम शर्मिलान जेन्ना स्टेटसाचेर आपल्या घातलो की दे वॉन्ट समबडी टू हेल्प इन दीस प्रोजेक्ट म्हणून, तेन्ना इमिजिएटली हांवें म्हटलें आय एम इन इट. इवन सर फ्रेडरिक तांणी ऑल दोज टेल्स म्हणून एक पुस्तक काडलेलें, बट इट रिमेन लिमिटेड टू द ई प्लॅटफॉर्म, लॉन्च जावंक पावलो ना. बट इट्स फायन, इट्स completely fine, because a project like this really requires a lot of effort, and I know that this book has a lot of efforts in it because it has been in progress for an entire year. Ma'am Sharmila has been working on it, like she was so busy, and she used to even text and say, I'm म्हाका हें काम आहा आनी हांव तितून गुंतलेलें आहा म्हणून म्हाका वेळ मेळना. Let's just we'll see how we are getting time and we'll get things done. So it was huge. Even when stories were sent to me and I had to edit them, meaning I had to translate them in English, or even म्हाका केन्ना केन्ना अहे स्टोरीज मेळटाल्यो जेन्ना लेखक जे आहले, the writers, they used to not write their stories properly. As Miss Alice just mentioned, she mentioned about a story wherein the father cut the daughter into pieces. So हित एक पोडवोळ्यांची एक काणी आहा, स्नेक गॉड, जेन्ना त्या बायलेक तो हे पिसीसान कातता आनी बायलेच्या जाग्याचेर मागीर ती पोडवोळी रुजोन येतात. दॅट इज अ स्नेक गॉड कम्स ऑन दॅट, and it is one among these tales, so please read it. So like that I'm saying, it gets very difficult, sometimes you cannot understand what the initial writer, the actual writer, is trying to say in his stories, but it was really fun being a part of this project, and it feels really good. So thank you, Miss, for this opportunity.
Yes, welcome. I must share, Megan, that the contributor of Podvada Chikani is here, and she will probably tell us, give us more insights into that. Can I invite Pranav Azrikar to share his views, his journey into the making of this work? And he's here.
Hello. It happened that one day I found myself in a WhatsApp group, added in a WhatsApp group, and there was this what Frederick had shared it. They are gathering all the folk tales, and I decided I really wanted to participate, and I don't know, I didn't recall anything. Since I had no knowledge of any folk tales, so I just pressed my memory, and in 7th grade, I remember two folk tales which I decided to contribute. One is the Wise Fools of Moira, and another one is the Atule Bitule, the Tiger and the Twins. So I had almost progressed in the same in the stories, and then I found that the Wise Fools of Moira has already been added in the previous volume, and so okay, this is only one story I would be giving. And later I recall another story from South Goa, that is the Giant of Kunkolin, or Kunkolso Manis. And there's also a YouTube storyline. It also has a YouTube storyline. And plus I'm a history student, and I know the story of Puna, the Buddha's apostle in Goa, who had helped to spread Buddhism. And so I decided to add these three as folk tales. In the previous two folk tales, Kunkolso Manis and Atule and Bitule, I just cross-checked every story which I came across, and I just added my own imagination. For example, I added my mother's village, Doriwana, in Atule Bitule, and my own birthplace, Mapusa, in the Kunkolso Manis. Yeah, that's my contribution. I have to thank
Sabatini.
Yeah, and I will thank Dr. Shamila and Frederick sir in this. Besides me, there are three more stories contributed by Jose Sabatini. He's it would be wrong to call him Portuguese, because he claims himself more Goan than myself. Jose Sabatini has submitted three folk tales. One is the Kadamba Princess, Abe Faria's story, the Katore Baji, and the Mystery of Donna Paula. Yeah. So
He was here before 60s.
Yeah, he was born in 1937. He was a Goan, Portuguese born in Goa. He's a veteran of 1961 Indo-Portuguese War, and he's already published author. He was a renowned author in Portuguese. And Jose Sabatini is not his name, just to be frank. It's his father's first name, and Sabatini is his mother's maternal name, the surname. He's already published. He has published in French, Spanish, and Portuguese. This is the first time now he's publishing in English. That's why he's back to Goa, and I am his ghostwriter. I'm working as his scribe. He's narrating. He's not good in English. I cannot understand Portuguese. We are conversing in Konkani, pure Konkani, and I'm translating it into English. It's a novel based in Portugal, and we hope that it's going to be released by end of next year. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
At the beginning of this event, I remember Shanti conversing with her English colleagues, and she said and Alice said we could have a BOS in history. I think we could have, Pamela, we could have a BOS in, they said, the English department said they could have a BOS in English, and I think we could have a BOS in history, because we have our own department here. There are history writers and researchers. I invite Pamela Fernandez to share her very interesting narrative on I'm not going to say anything much about it. It's something which is very novel. You can sit there in whichever position you're comfortable. It's something that is very unique. I have not heard that before, and I found it very, very interesting. She'll share it to the children who are present here, a couple of children who are also present here. So she'll share her experiences and maybe some excerpts of the story.
Whatever you want.
Thank you very much, Sharmila. In fact, it's the first time that I've ever penned. It's the first time that I've ever penned anything, and to get it published, and that too by my colleague in the department, I feel really privileged and grateful to her for this. Thank you, Sharmila. I have been a teacher for over 35 years, a history teacher for over 35 years. And I guess my love for history comes from listening to stories. I often tell my students at the end of a lecture, now I know you have enjoyed sitting down and listening to these Cobro, but all that will change when the question paper is in your hand. And I found that so true of them. They listen. I have some of my students here, but I know it's a different story when the question paper comes into their hand and everything changes about history and historical stories. My mother loved reading, but it was from my grandmother, my maternal grandmother. I guess that my mother also loved reading and literature. I used to spend a lot of time with my maternal grandmother. She was the only one that I had. And so it was quite natural for a 5-year-old to ask many questions. You know how children do. They learn a lot by asking questions. So that's how my story begins. I would say it starts with My Kitek Sukne Sodan Swolyang Rotta. I'm sure you all have heard the koel, isn't it? Weeks before the monsoon starts, sometimes right through the monsoons, even after you've had, torrential rains, and even after. It's always have this very mournful cry, and that's why I call the story the cry of the koel. It's like the call of the bird. And my grandmother, I remember, had a great way of telling stories. Unfortunately, as I was telling my colleague, I can't remember most of them in detail as I would remember this one. Some of them were pretty complex. I think that would fall more in the realm of psychology, which Father Rami would be able to interpret. But unfortunately, I don't remember. So this question came from a little girl to her grandmother about the loud, constant cry of the koel, which we also call the rainbird, or in Konkani, they correct me if I'm wrong, the kogul, or if you'll know about the kogul. So this is what she told me, and for her storytelling, as I said in the story, always carried a moral. It's the morals, the ethics that our grandmothers teach us through stories remain with us. I'm afraid sometimes our mothers are too strict and disciplinarians that, even in their everyday, so many are laughing me, we forget what they're trying to say. But the little that comes through our grandmother's stories remains with us. So it goes like this. The village plowman, who's always a very important person, who was always an important person in the village scene because of the work that he did, he used to send his cattle along with the rest of the village cattle to the nearby hills for grazing. And she said that in that every day it was the koel who was given the job of minding the cattle, and more importantly when they returned home in the evening to fill the koimi, which was the stone water trough which villagers used to fill water in for their cattle and sometimes use it for multi-purposes. So the koel was given this job of filling that koimi every day with water for the cattle. So when they returned from the hills, they would have a long, deep drink to quench their thirst. As I said before, they retired for the night. And the koel, we know, is actually known to be a little lazy bird. Never builds its own nest, lays its eggs in the crow's nest, and that is why when you hear some loud shouting and some aggressive cawing, it is the crows who are driving away the koel from their nests, and we know that the koel doesn't build its own nest. So the koel, being a little lazy, I guess, decided that he would take a shortcut to his responsibility and, mixed a little cow dung with the water. And we all know that when cow dung is mixed with water, cattle don't drink that water. And yes, did it for 1 day, 2 days, and after some time, the cattle stopped drinking water from that trough, which really saved the coil a lot of trouble of filling